Welcome. Glad you're here. I'm Jen Lepore, Marketing Team Coordinator at Custom Processing Services. And today we have KT Brickman, one of our technical sales engineers. And her and I are going to be talking a little bit about jet milling. So thank you, KT, for joining.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
So to give our audience some context, let's start with a little bit of a brief description or definition of jet milling and its main purpose.
So jet milling is using high velocity air to throw particles around to break the particles down to a finer particle size. I've worked here for 18 years, and I really did not understand what the heck was going on for the first 2 weeks I was here. So it's a bit complicated, but simple at the same time. But it takes a big particle and makes it smaller.
Okay. So how many jet mills or types of jet mills are out there? And kind of what's the difference between them?
In general, there's two styles of jet mills. There's a spiral jet mill, which can be vertical or can be horizontal. Sometimes it's referred to as a pancake mill. And then there's fluid bed jet mills, which they both use high velocity air to break the particles down. The fluid bed jet mill also has an internal classifier wheel, so you can get a little bit finer particle size compared to a spiral jet mill.
So you kind of touched a little bit on this, but what generally happens inside of a jet mill to reduce the particles?
So in general, the particles are flying around. They have that high velocity air coming through the nozzles, so a really high jet stream of air. It's throwing the particles around. They're colliding with each other and breaking down. In a spiral jet mill, they're going around in a spiral. As the particles become finer, they go towards the center of the jet mill, which is where they can exit and go to the collector. The coarser particles are rejected. They stay on the outside of the jet mill, so they can't exit the mill till they're fine enough. With a fluid bed jet mill with the internal classifier wheel I mentioned, that classifier wheel speed can be changed, so that has a much better control over the top size that a particle will be coming out of the jet mill. But the same idea. So the material gets thrown around, is colliding with each other. The particles are becoming finer. The finer ones go up, see the classifier wheel. If they're small enough, they can get through it. If they're too coarse, they get rejected and go back down to get thrown around some more and run into each other.
So it's very intricate.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in there, and you can't see it because it's inside a mill that isn't see-through. So you just have to trust the process sometimes.
So what type of industries would you say use jet milling? Is it only one or two types of industries, or what type of industries does CPS kind of work with?
So jet mill material can be used in a lot of different industries. Polymers, ceramics, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, the aerospace and automotive. There's a lot of different things out there. And CPS isn't necessarily privy to what they're being used for all the time, since we're kind of a middleman. And sometimes the products go directly to consumer use, and a lot of times they get used downstream, and we don't necessarily know what they're being used for.
What would you say how jet milling could benefit additive manufacturing out there?
So with additive manufacturing, I mean, it's giving precise, consistent results every time, which is really needed in that type of industry.
Why would you say particle size is so important to these types of industries out there?
Changing the particle size and making it finer has a lot of effects on the downstream process. It might change the color, it might change the flowability, the bulk density, how it interacts with other materials that it might be getting milled with, blended with, processed with downstream. So reducing that particle size really helps the downstream process. Or maybe like how something feels if you're going to be sending it directly, I guess, to a consumer, or how it tastes or the color of it that it's going to be seen.
You mentioned it's used in pharmaceuticals and aerospace and paints and all that. So how small can jet mills grind?
In general, a fluid bed jet mill with that internal classifier wheel can get to like 2 to 3 microns. The spiral mill will be a little bit bigger, but I mean, you're looking at like definitely less than 10 microns. which is fine as you can go without like getting the material wet.
Wow. Wow. So can you say that any type of material can get jet milled, or are there specific characteristics that make a certain material well suited for jet milling?
Yeah, so not every material can be jet milled. We do trial a lot of different materials because there are so many materials out there that we have not processed before. But in general, we're looking for material that's friable. So if you can break it down in your hands, or if you can take a hammer and smash it and it goes into a bunch of little pieces, great. That's a great candidate for jet milling. If a material is more like rubbery, try to smash it with that hammer, and it kind of like bounces off, or maybe it just like deforms a little and then goes back to its original shape. That's not going to jet mill very well, if at all. In general, materials that are dry or have a really low moisture content handle better in the jet mills.
So would you say jet mills can be used to blend materials?
In some cases, yes. So if a lot of times when you're jet milling, the material, the particle size as it's getting reduced, it kind of has a tendency to has a higher static, or a tendency to want to like stick together. So oftentimes, like we're adding an additive to that material to help it flow, so it's not sticking together and pretty much like agglomerating. But we can add that extra material like at the beginning of the process and co-feed it in with the main ingredient at small percentages. And during that feeding process and during the jet milling, they can kind of intermingle, and then you can have a product that's blended a bit coming out.
So let's talk about some advantages about conventional milling. So how does jet milling stack up against more conventional milling methods?
So jet milling, it really uses, like I mentioned, that particle to particle collision. So you're not going to get any contamination from running into other pieces of the equipment, or running like on a mechanical mill or a media mill. It really reduces the particle size against itself. So there's no contamination. The other thing that's really helpful is there's no temperature or increased temperature that's being introduced. So it all takes place at ambient conditions. So if you have a material that's sensitive to temperature, jet milling is a really good way to go. So it's not going to see any high temperatures that might affect how it performs.
Okay, so what would you say drives the selection of jet milling over other milling methods for a particular application?
And the main one's going to be the particle size. The jet mill is going to give a really tight, small, or fine distribution that's going to be very repeatable, especially if you're looking to keep the material dry or not suspend it like into a dispersion to like wet mill it down to a finer size. The jet mill is very diverse. There's a lot of different things that can change, like the processing parameters. So in general, it's making the finer particle size, but it can also make a little bit coarser particle size, or a broader distribution depending on how you set the jet mill up and the operating conditions you're using.
We obviously talked about the advantages. So let's talk about some challenges that jet milling faces. So why does the process consume so much energy?
That driving force in the jet mill is the air. So you're going to need a big air compressor to provide that air to the mill. If you don't happen to already have air compressors on site, that's a big piece of the puzzle that's needed that makes it kind of cost prohibitive for some folks, let alone just like the jet mill itself.
Yeah. So you're kind of going into my next question of, does the specialized equipment and expertise required for jet milling make it cost effective for manufacturers to bring in-house, would you say?
It really depends on the customer and what their current setup is. Some folks are starting out and they don't have that capital or the space or the expertise. And so that's where CPS as a contract manufacturer can really help out until the with processing the material using our expertise, and processing that material while their customer base or volumes grow and they can support bringing that in-house.
Dust and agglomeration appear to be key considerations, obviously, during the whole jet milling process. So how would you say a toll processor helps manage these concerns?
So yeah, dust is a big concern from the safety point of view and also from the handling point of view. Safety is like the number one concern at custom processing. So one of the first things we do is look at the safety data sheet before we bring products in. And we want to understand how we can safely handle it and understand if the material is combustible. You need to have the right equipment in place so that if there is a deflagration or the material does set fire or has an explosion, that the equipment is set up to safely handle it and contain it. So that's one of the first things we look at when we're bringing in new products or trialing things out. The other part of handling the dust is when customers get it back and they're going to be opening up their packaging and they don't want to have it poof out all over them or all over their area or their customer's area. We do offer a variety of different packaging, so sacks or bags or drums. Everything ships out of here dust free. It all gets inspected and vacuumed off and whatnot so that customers, when they're receiving product from CPS, aren't dealing with the dust. It's all contained within the packaging. Another potential that might happen with dust is that it could agglomerate, which we kind of talked about before. That's something else we consider. So maybe the material compacts when it's stacked too high or there's too much weight on top of it. So you'd want to use a rigid package so you don't have that compression. Or you'd want to introduce like those additives to help with the product when it gets back to where it's going to be used. Yeah, so there's a lot of different concerns with dust. Making sure you have the right nuisance dust collection, so it's a clean process and contained as much as possible. We don't want dust sitting on ledges here. So that's just general housekeeping is something else that CPS is concerned with, and customers might be too when they're getting this finer material back to be handling.
You're kind of bringing up a lot of good points, and that's kind of leading me up to a pretty larger question. How does partnering with the toll processor help manufacturers overcome these jet milling challenges?
A lot of times we have the expertise and we've handled a lot of different materials, not all of them because we are always getting new projects brought in, but we can pull from those years of experience and determine how best to handle your material and kind of know what to expect. In some cases, we help customers like install equipment at their site and can provide that insight of, oh, this is what works best. This is what we saw with your material when we processed it in-house. This is what we suggest to handle it at your facility. And we can really help bridge that gap of filling customer orders while the equipment is being installed and brought up online.
Well, that's good to know, because I don't think a lot of people realize that that's something that we do here. So excellent.
Yeah, I mean, we can process stuff for years and years and years, no problem. And we can process stuff for a couple months while equipment's getting brought online. Either way, we can do it. We can process small amounts if you only have 10 kgs to run once a year, or if you've got truckloads to run for several years. We can handle both.
Thank you for stopping by, KT. And that's all we have. But everyone, thanks to you for watching this month's Custom Processing Services Toll Manufacturer Minute. Be sure to subscribe to our blog and to get the latest episodes of our show and news and some insights from our team of experts like KT. And we'll catch you next time. Ready? Oh, yeah. Fun.
Which way are we going? This way? Go this way?
That way.